In the vast world of snare wires out there, there are a lot of ultra-wide 30 and plus strand options. Today, we're going to talk about all of the things that can come into play here that could harm your sound and your playing, frankly, if you choose to go this route. There are lots of things in the world of drums where more is more, and in this case with snare wires, this kind of is true as far as the snare wire sound goes. If we add more wires, we hear more wire sound, but is that necessarily what we want? When we add more mass to the bottom of the drum in any way, we are making a trade-off, and today we're going to get into everything you're going to lose and everything you're going to need to think about if you decide to use ultra-wide wires like these. Let's hear how this drum sounds at a fairly medium tuning that we feel pretty good about. The first thing that you might notice, as I do, is that we are hearing a ton of wire sound, which is expected because we have half again more wires than the average set that we normally keep on this drum. This means for us a lot more sustain, a lot more breathy sounds, and also different behavior from the center to the edge. Now, for those out there who swear by wide wires and think that they are the only way to go, I'm here to tell you that this is a thing that you can use for a lot of situations, but it is not the only way, and there are a lot of perils with getting totally attached to a certain way of doing things, whether it's tabletop tight snare side, or just above a wrinkle kick batter tuning, or ultra-wide snare wires. There are even drum manufacturers out there who say that this is the right way to go, that this is the only way to go, and that anything else is stupid. And frankly, that's stupid. We need to keep ourselves open to possibilities like we did here today, trying it out on this drum, see if we like it, consider possibilities, and understand also that if something is working, hold on to it, and if it's not, throw it away. There are lots of reasons why a drummer might choose to go with wider wires. The number one that I hear from people is that they just want to hear more snare. We're definitely getting that, but what are we starting to lose when we do this? The first thing that happens when you add more wires is you're adding more mass to the bottom of the drum and you're covering the reso head with more stuff. So that means for us that we are going to start to lose articulation because we are spreading the sound and the attack over a lot more wires and they're all moving at the same time. This is also why, if you've ever checked out orchestral or classical snare drum wires, they are often very narrow with many less strands of wire, and sometimes they're even shaped slightly differently to further add articulation. If you like what you're seeing today, please take a moment and follow the link below to our Patreon. It's the best way to help us continue to make this show, do experiments like we did today, and provide you with the content that you have grown to love. The next thing we can run into is the possibility of using all of this mass, tightening it up to get more articulation, and choking out the drum way easier than if we were using narrower wires and similarly tightening up to go for articulation. It may seem at first glance that we just need to tighten the wires and we'll get rid of all that extraneous noise coming from them, but let's go through the full resolution of the snare mechanism and see if that's the case. What we end up with is articulation in the end, but the drum is completely choked out and it's still a little bit trashy toward the edges, which doesn't sound great. Additionally, if we tension them up very high like this and further choke out the snare side head, in addition to all that mass that's on there, we're starting to hear the overtones more dramatically ringing out in a way that isn't exactly pleasing. This in turn sends us toward muffling the drum, which ironically is what the wires are doing to the other side of the drum. And now we're in an arms race that ends up in a quieter, deader, really lifeless sounding instrument. Another side effect of this that's a little bit less pronounced, but is something that I've experienced in harder hitting situations, is that when you add mass similar to a ring or anything else, you start to suppress the clarity and attack of the rim shot. It's not as dramatic when we're using wide wires as it would be if we were using, say, a big studio ring on here, but it is something to think about if you really need your rim shot to get through the band and be super present. Now we need to address the specific drum that you might be using at this point, because if you are using super wide wires and your drum has a very narrow, and particularly if it's narrow and deep, snare bed, you're going to run into real challenges with getting all of these wires to lay flush on the snare side head and thus work together and give you a single sound. If you've installed wires like this and you flip the drum over and discover that the center seems very tight when you move them with your finger gently, and the outer wires are looser, this could be one of the problems that you're running into, and it's definitely worth looking into before you go with investing in wider wires if you haven't already. The wider the set of wires you use, the more prevalent this issue is going to become, so you need to make sure if you want to go this route that your drum can accommodate. Acrolites and Superphonics have very, very wide and relatively shallow snare beds. There are others out there that don't, so take a look. Now, having said all that, this drum is very accommodating of wide wires. We've used it on them before, and we're still having these issues. They are less bad than they would be on a drum with narrower ones, but we're not out of the woods by any stretch. Now that we've addressed the drum, let's talk about the tensioning of the snare side head. Something that I've seen with drummers that I've worked with and also with drums that I've purchased or checked out in stores is a real prevalence of high tension on the tension rods that are right next to the wires and lower tension on the rest of them. This means that you end up with a hoop that's kind of tacoed. And if you use wide wires like this, a funny thing starts to happen where you get extremely low tension on the outer wires and extremely high tension on the center as you bring the resolution up. But at the same time, you never get a balance between those two things. I've retuned the snare side head of this drum to exhibit these issues so that we can hear how that sounds both in single hits, through the tensioning spectrum, and in a groove. As we can hear and see, the center of the drum is dark, dead sounding, and choked. The edge is wild. The overtones are tricky. The overall sound of the drum doesn't sound great, and it doesn't sit with the rest of the kit in a way that's pleasing to the ear, which, frankly, a lot of snare sounds that are unusual by themselves can blend into a groove, but this one doesn't work at all. This can also, over the long run of over-tensioning the wires to try to fix the problem, end up bending the end plates of your wires and damaging them in a way that is also totally unfixable. So if you go to the extent of purchasing wide wires, make sure that you keep an eye on this, because there's nothing sadder than getting new wires and then immediately ruining them trying to make them sound good. This isn't to say that wide wires are just a complete no-go. They can work in certain kinds of grooves where we're looking for a lot of snare sound, a broader sound, or we want something that's a little bit more pillowy without necessarily having to tune the drum super low. Having said that, I don't currently have any drums that have these installed, and I don't really find that I need them for anything in particular. We get super fat sounds here with standard 20 to 24 strand wires, and this is an interesting experiment, but we do have to keep everything we talked about in mind if this is something that you want to try. The conclusion that we came to today is that this is the most recent in a long line of blind spots that we are actively investigating in our own playing and sound making, and that we hope you investigate as well, because playing drums and owning drums is full of things that we don't know that we don't know. And that means that any opportunity that we have to learn is a good one. Even if it results in something that you don't necessarily ever want to use, that's fine. That's okay. It's one more thing we don't have to worry about, and we can continue down the road of finding the stuff that does work for us.